So imagine trying to build this massive, multi-million-dollar entertainment franchise,
Okay.
but you are legally forced to pretend that your newest, most accessible product has absolutely nothing to do with your most popular one.
Right, which just sounds like complete corporate suicide.
Totally. I mean, why on earth would a company deliberately fracture its own audience like that? But in 1981, for the creators of Dungeons& and Dragons, that exact legal nightmare actually and accidentally forged one of the greatest pieces of game design in history.
It really is. It's a perfect example of how intense corporate constraints can accidentally forge a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Because we usually assume world building requires these massive, sprawling encyclopedias, right? The bigger the world, the heavier the instruction manual. But this forced isolation stripped everything down to its barest bones.
Which brings us to today's topic. Welcome, Leonard, to today's deep dive. We are exploring the 1981 Dungeons& and Dragons basic set.
Specifically, the edition edited by Tom Moldvay.
Exactly. Fans usually just refer to this as B/X. We have a great stack of sources today, historical analyses, the actual rule books, mechanical teardowns of this specific 64-page booklet.
It's tiny.
It really is. And our mission today is to figure out how this tiny booklet, marketed to kids in toy stores, accidentally became a masterclass in game design and really the undisputed holy grail of the modern tabletop gaming renaissance.
So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it. So to understand what Tom Moldvay accomplished here, we first have to look at the bitter corporate feud that forced it to exist in the first place.
Right, the timeline is important here.
Very. So the original version of Dungeons & Dragons, which the sources often call OD&D, came out in 1974, designed by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson.
And the ideas were completely revolutionary, but the presentation was, well, highly esoteric.
Oh, incredibly messy. If you weren't already deeply ingrained in, historical miniature wargaming, making sense of those rules was a massive headache. Yeah, the early sources describe it almost like trying to read a stereo manual from the 1970s. So as TSR, the company publishing the game, started growing, they realized they were missing a huge demographic.
So in 1977, they put out a basic set edited by J. Eric Holmes.
Right, and this was meant to be purely introductory, like a stepping stone.
Exactly. You play levels 1 through 3, you figure out what a 20-sided die is, and then you graduate. You move up to the heavy, complex hardcover books of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, or AD&D, which Gygax was developing at the time.
Well, that was the business plan anyway.
Yeah.
But then the financial realities of co-authorship kind of got in the way.
Yeah, they really did. So Dave Arneson, the co-creator, had left TSR. However, under his original 1974 contract, he and Gygax were supposed to split a 20% royalty on all D&D rule booklets.
That's a huge cut.
It is. So as Gygax and the financial backers of TSR, the Bloom Brothers, developed AD&D, they made this highly controversial legal claim. They argued that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons was a totally new, distinct game system.
Which is wild.
And because it was quote-unquote new, they claimed they didn't owe Arneson a single dime of royalties on it.
Which is just an incredibly bold move. I mean, it's like Apple being legally forced to pretend the iPad and the Mac have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Just totally different ecosystems, just to avoid paying a co-founder.
That's actually a great analogy. And unsurprisingly, Arneson sued.
I mean, of course he did. He wanted his financial stake in this rapidly expanding franchise.
Right, and the resulting settlement completely fractured the D&D multiverse. The settlement dictated that Arneson would receive a capped 2.5% royalty on specific AD&D hardcovers. But crucially, he kept his full original royalties on the basic D&D line.
Oh, wow. So because of that split, TSR basically had to make a business decision.
The legally mandated one, yeah. They permanently severed the franchise into two mutually exclusive lines.
But so Basic could no longer function as a stepping stone or a tutorial for advanced.
Exactly. It was legally and commercially forced to become its own completely self-contained, standalone game.
So suddenly, this little tutorial box has to carry its own weight. It can't just tease the bigger game. It has to be an entire, complete reality.
And that's exactly where TSR brings in Tom Moldvay. His task is to tear the old 1977 tutorial down to the studs.
But he's operating under a brutal constraint. I mean, he has to fit an entire functional fantasy reality into exactly 64 pages.
Actually, it's 60 pages if you exclude the title, the foreword, and the glossary.
That is insane. 60 pages to explain how magic works, how to run combat, how to build a dungeon, and how to arbitrate literally every possible scenario a group of humans can dream up.
It requires a level of ruthless simplification that most modern game designers would completely balk at. And Moldvay, along with developers Dave Cook and Steve Marsh, signaled this radical shift right on the cover.
Ah, we have to talk about the cover. The Errol Otis artwork.
Yes, because it fundamentally changes the promise the game makes to the player.
I actually have the cover pulled up right here. It's so iconic. You know, a lot of modern fantasy art shows these glowing superheroes posing stoically on top of a mountain.
Looking majestic, yeah.
Right. This is the exact opposite. It depicts this heavily armored fighter with a simple spear and a magic user locked in a desperate kinetic fight against a green dragon.
But the setting is what's so striking.
Yes, they are in waist-deep, dark, subterranean water.
Right, you've got the torchlight casting these harsh shadows, the splashing water, and the fact that the fighter is using a spear to keep the monster at bay rather than, swinging a giant broadsword.
It totally markets action in a confined, gritty space.
Exactly. You aren't playing epic demigods. You are playing terrified tomb robbers fighting for your life in a wet, dark cave.
It's so visceral.
It is. And Moldvay's brilliant foreword immediately establishes the philosophical pillar required to survive that cave, which is rulings, not rules.
Right. He explicitly tells the new player that there are no winners or losers,
Mm-hmm.
and that the text in the book is really just a set of suggestions.
Which sounds totally counterintuitive for a rule book, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But it was a vital mechanism for saving page count, and also for empowering the player running the game, the dungeon master.
Ah, I see.
Moldvay basically codified the idea that no rule is sacred if changing it keeps the game moving and encourages creativity. Instead of giving the DM a 500-page index with a specific mechanical subsystem for climbing a wet rope versus a dry rope.
He essentially just says, use your brain, make a ruling, and keep the tension high.
Exactly. But the mechanics they did keep are incredibly strict. And frankly, for someone used to modern gaming, it's a bit jarring.
Oh, for sure. Let's take character creation.
Yeah.
With the non-gamers listening, to figure out how strong or smart your character is, you don't get a pool of points to carefully construct a perfectly balanced hero.
No, you roll 3d6 in order.
Right, meaning you roll 3 standard 6-sided dice to generate a random number for your strength, then you roll again for intelligence, and so on. You don't get to swap them around. If you roll poorly for strength, well, congratulations, you're weak.
And the probability of rolling 3 6-sided dice creates a very strong bell curve. Most of your scores are going to fall right in the middle, between 9 and 12.
And Moldvay's system gives absolutely 0 statistical bonuses for average scores.
Right. Modifiers are incredibly rare. You only get a meaningful modifier, a +3 or -3, if you hit the extreme maximum of 18 or the absolute minimum of 3.
Which is statistically super rare. So the math just inherently assumes you are an average person braving the dark.
Exactly.
But I noticed something else while reading through the PDFs we pulled for this. I kept scrolling, looking for the skills page.
Oh, right.
There are no perception checks. There are no diplomacy skills or stealth buttons. So wait, if I am playing this game and I don't have a button to push on my character sheet, how do I actually do anything?
It's a great question.
Like if I want to sneak past a goblin or search a room for a trap, what am I rolling?
Well, this raises a really important point about how we interact with games. In a modern game, you just say, I roll a perception check, look at a piece of plastic, and the DM tells you the answer.
Right. Yeah.
But Moldvay demands a shift in mindset to what we now call the OSR, or Old School Renaissance ethos, which is player skill over character skill.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means you don't roll a die to search for a trap. You, the actual player, have to physically describe to the dungeon master exactly how you are engaging with the fictional environment.
So instead of saying, I check the floor, I have to say, like, I take out my water skin and pour water on the stone tiles to see if it pools in a hidden seam or slopes toward a pit.
Precisely. It forces you to engage with the environment, not just look at a list of abstract skills on a piece of paper.
That's really cool, but also sounds chaotic.
It could be, which is why, to manage this highly descriptive style of play, the game implements a strict chain of command sit table.
The mapper and the caller, right? Explain that, because it sounds almost militaristic.
It is very procedural. So the mapper is a player tasked with translating the DM's verbal descriptions onto graph paper, dealing with all the inevitable inaccuracies of trying to map a lightless maze based on what your character can barely see.
Sounds stressful.
And then the caller acts as the party spokesperson. You might have 6 players intensely debating tactics, right?
Right, everyone shouting over each other.
Exactly. But the fictional world does not move forward until the caller officially turns to the DM and states the group's final action. It stops the session from just devolving into table shouting.
You'd think with all this structure, they would just tell the DM to be a really good storyteller to keep everyone entertained.
But Moldvay went the exact opposite route.
Yeah, he built this impartial, almost mathematical engine to run the game, rather than relying on arbitrary narrative beats. The core of this is the exploration turn.
Time is the fundamental pressure mechanic of the entire BX system. Every turn you spend exploring the dungeon represents exactly 10 minutes of in-game time.
So moving cautiously down a hallway, tapping the floorboards, picking a rusty lock, that takes 1 turn.
And while you are doing that, your torches are burning down. Your protective spells are expiring.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because every 2 turns, so every 20 minutes in the game world, the DM rolls a single 6-sided die. And if it lands on a 1, a wandering monster appears.
Right.
Now, in a Marvel movie, if a monster appears, the heroes cheer, crack their knuckles, and beat it up. But in this game, wandering monsters carry absolutely no treasure.
None.
Therefore, the goal of the game isn't to fight everything like a superhero. It's an Ocean's 11 heist.
Yes.
You don't want to fight the casino guards. You want to avoid them, grab the gold from the vault, and get out.
And what's fascinating here is how beautifully the underlying math supports that exact realization. The monsters in this 1981 rule set do not have the inflated health pools we see today.
Right.
In modern editions, a massive demon might boast nearly 300 hit points, meaning combat takes an hour of just chipping away at a health bar. In BX, a massive Balor demon has only about 58 hit points. Everything is fragile.
Including the players.
Oh, especially the players.
The lethality is completely absurd. In a modern game, a player expects to take a broadsword to the face and, sleep it off by morning. In BX, tripping down the stairs is a tactical emergency.
Literally.
A standard goblin thrusting a simple spear deals 1d6 damage, and a first-level wizard only has 100d4 hit points. That means a single average poke from a low-level monster has a very high chance of instantly permanently killing your character.
Which is why the game implements its most important metric, XP for gold. You earn experience points, which is the metric used to level up and get stronger, primarily by recovering treasure and bringing it back to civilization.
So you get 1 experience point for every gold piece you secure.
Exactly. Monsters give out a pitiful amount of experience by comparison, so your economic incentive perfectly aligns with the lethality of the world.
Right.
The optimal strategy is always to bypass, trick, or negotiate with the monsters, steal their belt, and escape unharmed. Combat is basically a failure state.
And Moldvay gave the DM the perfect tools to facilitate that negotiation too, the reaction and morale mechanics. Because if you accidentally stumble into a group of heavily armed orcs, it's not an automatic death sentence.
No, the DM rolls 2d6, so 2 6-sided dice to determine the monster's initial reaction to seeing you.
Let's break down the probability of that 2d6 roll because it's really the hidden genius of the game.
It is. If you roll a standard 20-sided die, every number from 1 to 20 has a flat 5% chance of happening. It is completely unpredictably random.
Right.
But when you roll 2 6-sided dice and add them together, the math fundamentally changes into a steep bell curve. There are many different combinations that add up to a 7, making it highly probable, about a 16% chance.
But rolling a 2 or a 12 requires rolling double 1s or double 6s, which is extremely rare.
Right. So Moldvay essentially hard-coded caution into the physics of the game. An extreme result, like the monsters attacking on sight or instantly offering you all their money, almost never happens.
They usually roll a 7, meaning they just stare at you, waiting to see what you do.
Yes. It transforms every encounter into a tense standoff. You can bribe a dragon. You can hire the orcs to fight someone else for you.
And if a fight does break out, the mathematical curve kicks in again with the morale system.
Exactly. When a monster takes its first casualty or loses half its forces, the DM checks morale using that same 2d6 bell curve.
So monsters rarely fight to the absolute death.
Usually they break and run. It accurately reflects battlefield psychology and creates a tense diplomatic frontier rather than just a monotonous meat grinder.
So we have these mechanics enforcing this gritty, terrified for your life style of play. But that creates a new problem. You can't drop these fragile, cautious characters into a generic, shiny, high fantasy kingdom where everything is perfect and kings just hand out magical swords.
No, the rules in the world would violently clash.
Right. They needed a setting that felt as dangerous and historically grounded as the mechanics themselves. But again, TSR's corporate politics got in the way.
The Greyhawk embargo.
Yes.
By 1980, almost all of TSR's published adventures were set in Gary Gygax's personal campaign world, the world of Greyhawk. But Gygax strictly reserved Greyhawk as the exclusive intellectual property of his AD&D line.
So the BX line was completely banned from referencing or using any of it.
Completely. So Tom Moldvay and Lawrence Schick, the director of design at the time, are told they have to come up with a completely new wilderness setting to put in the rulebook.
And what do? They dig up their old college homebrew campaign from when they were students at Kent State University?
Yes.
They literally just take their old, hand-drawn maps, hand them to the art department, and accidentally create what would become the beloved known world, which fans later called Mystera.
It is a brilliant piece of historical recycling, but what made the known world so enduring was their approach to world building.
Right, because remember, they have a strict 64-page limit.
Exactly. They do not have the luxury of dedicating 20 pages to dense high fantasy exposition, so they used real-world historical analogs to instantly convey deep cultural and sociological friction.
I love this approach. Instead of generic fantasy kingdoms with unpronounceable names, you have the Empire of Thyatis, who mirror the Byzantine or Roman Empire.
Imperialist, highly structured, constantly expanding.
Right. And they've recently conquered a people called the Traladarans, who are a direct analog for Eastern European and Slavic cultures. Deeply tied to the dark forests, highly superstitious, full of folklore.
And that cultural dynamic is front and center in the Grand Duchy of Karamakos, which serves as the default setting for the BX rules.
Duke Stefan Karamakos traded his ancestral lands to the Thyacian emperor just to get autonomous rulership over this wild, untamed frontier.
And by using those historical touchstones, players instantly understand the vibe. You don't need to read a novel to understand that an occupying militaristic empire and the indigenous forest dwellers do not get along.
It does all the heavy lifting of world building in a fraction of the word count.
It really does. And Karamakos itself perfectly matches the mechanics. It's a low-level sandbox. The quests aren't about saving the world from an ancient cosmic evil.
You are just trying to survive the frontier. Dealing with border defense, local political rebellion, clearing out ancient ruins, even the cosmology supports this grounded feeling.
Oh, the immortals.
Yeah, there are no gods.
Right. The known world operates on this unique system of immortals. There are no omnipotent, unapproachable creator deities sitting up in the clouds. The highest cosmic powers are ascendant mortals who achieved immortality through legendary deeds and rigorous terrestrial trials.
Which is such a cool concept.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it completely shifts the narrative role of the cleric class. You aren't serving an unfathomable divine concept. You are following the philosophical path of a legendary historical figure who actually walked the earth, bled, and suffered just like you.
It totally grounds the magic in the literal history of the dirt you are walking on. So you have this totally unique, culturally grounded world paired with this razor-sharp, highly lethal rule set. But looking at the historical consensus in our sources, it wasn't universally beloved at the time it was published, was it?
Far from it. In the 1980s, there was a massive stigma attached to the basic set.
Because of the legal split.
Exactly. AD&D was sold as massive, expensive, hardcover reference manuals in specialized hobby shops. BX was sold in commercial toy stores with the tagline, ages 10 and up, stamped on the box.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, a strict social hierarchy formed in the gaming community. Playing basic was considered less hardcore. Many AD&D players looked down on BX as a kid's game or a set of training wheels, entirely missing the elegance of its design.
And mechanically, Moldvay made some polarizing choices that alienated people who wanted complex character customization. The most controversial one has to be the races class system.
Yes, very controversial.
Let me explain this for the listener. In this rule book, if you play a human, you pick a job. You decide to be a fighter, a cleric, a magic user, or a thief.
Yeah.
But if you want to play a demi-human, you are your job.
You just play an elf or a dwarf.
Exactly. You can't be a dwarven cleric or an elven thief. And worse, there are hard level caps. Humans can level up to 36 eventually, but halflings are permanently capped at level 8. So I have to ask, was this just a lazy mathematical shortcut to keep the booklet under 64 pages?
It's really easy to view it that way through a modern lens where players expect infinite customization. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it wasn't a shortcut at all. It was a highly deliberate philosophical choice.
Really?
Yeah, Moldvay was using mechanics to dictate the theme of the world. He wanted to enforce a strictly human-centric campaign tone. By locking non-humans into specific mechanical archetypes, the game world maintains a distinct sociological flavor.
Oh, I see. Humans represent diverse potential.
Exactly. Ambition and infinite adaptability. They can be anything and go as high as they want. Demi-humans, on the other hand, represent ancient, specialized, and rigid cultures.
So the level caps reflect that cultural stagnation.
Precisely. It's a masterclass in niche protection, forcing players to interact with the world exactly how the designer intended.
It's a brilliant way to bake the lore directly into the math. But it definitely caused friction with players who just wanted to play like a dwarven wizard. So much so that in 1983, TSR actually replaced Moldvay's rulebook entirely.
Yes, with a new revision by Frank Mentzer, the famous Red Box.
Mentzer rewrote the presentation, made it much friendlier, and added choose-your-own-adventure tutorials to ease people in.
And Mentzer's version absolutely exploded the game's commercial reach globally. But among game design purists, analysts, and historians today, the 1981 Moldvay text remains the superior reference document.
It is tighter, more efficient.
And uncompromising in its vision. That specific 64-page booklet is the undisputed bedrock, the absolute Rosetta Stone of the modern old-school Renaissance movement. If you look at massive modern indie games like Old School Essentials, they derive their entire mechanical chassis directly, line by line, from Moldvay.
Which is an incredible legacy. It really proves the point we started with. Strict limitations, whether it's a terrifying 64-page limit or a corporate ban on using your own company's lore. Don't stifle creativity. They forge diamonds.
Absolutely. It's a lesson in how clear procedures, like the rigid 10-minute turn, and trusting the user to make rulings over rules, create timeless design.
It gives the players an objective mathematical engine that generates tension automatically. The DM doesn't have to exhaust themselves inventing drama.
Right. The system produces it naturally through time constraints and probability.
So what does this all mean for you? Well, let's look back at my favorite rule in the whole book. BX famously tied character advancement directly to stealing gold. That XP for gold mechanic.
A great motivator.
Exactly. If you get 1 point for a gold coin, but a goblin gives 5 points and can instantly kill you, the math inherently teaches you to be a cautious, clever negotiator who actively avoids lethal combat.
It guides your behavior.
Right. But modern games often reward points just for killing monsters or hitting story milestones, which turns players into fearless, combat-hungry superheroes. It makes you realize, if the way we tally points fundamentally changes how we behave within a game. What behaviors are you accidentally encouraging in your own life, your team, or your workplace based on the metrics you choose to reward?
That is a great point.
Next time you're handed a tiny box of constraints, remember that red cover and look very closely at how you are scoring the game.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll see you next time. Keep learning.